You leaned over the edge of a pond once, maybe at a park, maybe at an aquarium, maybe in someone's garden. The fish came up. You probably assumed they came because they thought you might have food. That's a reasonable guess. Fish are drawn to anything that disturbs the surface. They live in a world of vibrations and shadows and shifting light, and a large shape leaning over the water is a stimulus worth investigating. What you probably didn't consider is whether the fish knew it was you. The standard assumption, going back to the 19th century, was that fish couldn't tell people apart. The fish brain was thought to be too simple, too small in absolute volume, too dominated by sensory processing, too lacking in the cortical structures that mammals use for complex recognition. Fish were assumed to operate on shape and motion. A human was a human. A heron was a heron. The category was the resolution. That's not what's happening. The real answer is far stranger, and the experiment that finally proved it had to be designed around the fact that fish don't have hands or facial expressions or any of the response systems researchers normally use to confirm recognition. In 2016, Kate Newport, a behavioral biologist at the University of Oxford, decided to test something specific. She wanted to know whether archerfish, small freshwater fish from Southeast Asia, known for spitting jets of water at insects above the surface, could distinguish between two human faces. The setup was clever because it didn't rely on the fish doing anything natural. It used the one behavior archerfish do better than almost any animal on Earth. They aim. Newport built tanks, above which two large photographs were mounted side by side. Both were human faces. The archerfish were trained to spit water at one specific face. When they hit the correct face, food dropped into the tank. When they hit the wrong face, nothing happened. Then she made it harder. She presented the trained face alongside 44 new faces the fish had never seen. The faces were standardized, same lighting, same orientation, same neutral expression, no glasses, no hair color cues. The differences between them were the small structural differences that humans use to recognize each other. Eye spacing, nose shape, the geometry of the cheekbones. The archerfish spat at the correct face about 81% of the time. Newport then made it harder again. She converted the photos to black and white, removed color and brightness cues, and presented only the internal features of the face. No hairline, no head shape. The fish still picked the right one. The accuracy stayed at 86%. A fish with no neocortex, no fusiform face area, no folded hemispheres. The structures the entire field of neuroscience had assumed were required for face recognition, was identifying a specific human face out of dozens with the kind of accuracy you'd expect from a primate. The paper was published in Scientific Reports. The implications were immediate and unwelcome. For decades, face recognition had been treated as a specialized cognitive ability that evolved specifically in mammals with rich social lives. The assumption was that the brain regions involved had developed because they were necessary for the task. A fish doing it without those regions broke that story. Either fish had developed an entirely separate neural pathway for face recognition that converged on the same outcome, or face recognition didn't require the specialized hardware everyone assumed it did. Both interpretations were uncomfortable. The first meant that a cognitive ability previously thought to be the domain of social mammals had evolved at least twice, independently, in lineages separated by more than 400 million years. The second meant that the elaborate face processing networks in the human brain might not be doing what neuroscientists thought they were doing. But the archerfish was only the beginning. In 2010, Mike Webster, working at the University of St. Andrews, ran a series of experiments on a small freshwater fish called the three-spined stickleback. The stickleback was already known in animal behavior research as a model system for studying social cognition. Webster wanted to know whether sticklebacks could recognize specific individuals, not just members of their own species, but particular fish they had interacted with before. The fish could. They preferred to school with individuals they had previously been exposed to over unfamiliar fish of the same species, even when other variables, size, brightness, body shape, were controlled. They were tracking identity at the individual level, the fish equivalent of remembering a face. Then there is the cleaner wrasse. Cleaner wrasses are small reef fish that make their living by eating parasites off larger fish. They run what are essentially underwater service stations. The same client fish return again and again to the same wrasse, often for years. A wrasse can have hundreds of regular clients, each with a different body size, a different parasite load, A different temperament. Researchers at the University of Neuchâtel demonstrated that cleaner wrasses don't just recognize their clients, they remember which clients are tourist species that visit the reef briefly and which are residents that live in the area permanently. They prioritize service for the tourists, because the tourists will leave and find another wrasse if they're kept waiting. The residents have nowhere else to go. The fish is making strategic decisions about individual customers based on long-term memory of their behavior. In 2019, Masanori Koda and his team at Osaka City University ran a study on cleaner wrasses that produced a result so unexpected it triggered a years-long argument in the scientific literature. They placed cleaner wrasses in front of mirrors. The fish initially attacked their reflections, as fish typically do. But after several days, the attacks stopped. The fish began performing unusual postures in front of the mirror, twisting, holding their bodies at angles they didn't use in any other context. Then, Koda's team marked individual fish with a small brown spot on a part of the body the fish could only see in the mirror. The fish, after seeing themselves in the mirror, attempted to scrape the marked area against the tank bottom, a behavior they performed only when marked, only after mirror exposure, and only in response to the visible spot. This is the mirror test. It is the same test used to demonstrate self-recognition in great apes, dolphins, elephants, and magpies. A small reef fish passed it. The interpretation is still contested. Some researchers argue the fish are responding to a perceived parasite on a tank mate, not recognizing themselves. Others argue that the response is too specific, too contingent on the mirror exposure, to be explained as anything other than self-recognition. The debate has lasted 6 years and shows no signs of resolving. Now think about what this adds up to. A small freshwater fish can identify a specific human face out of 44 candidates. A schooling fish remembers individual conspecifics by sight. A reef cleaner fish recognizes hundreds of individual clients and adjusts its behavior strategically based on what kind of client they are. And in one species, the fish may be capable of recognizing itself. The fish brain is not what we thought it was. It is doing the same kinds of work that mammalian and avian brains do, with completely different hardware, evolved along an entirely separate trajectory for hundreds of millions of years. The fish you saw at the pond, the aquarium, the garden, there is a real chance that if you had visited regularly, the fish would have started to tell you apart from other visitors. Not as a member of a species, as a specific individual. The bigger the cognitive demands of its environment, the more likely it is to be tracking you as a particular shape with particular timing, a particular pattern of presence and absence. This is not the story we tell about fish. We tell ourselves they have 3-second memories, that they are essentially reflex machines wrapped in scales, that they are the cognitive floor of the vertebrate world. None of that is supported by the research. It is a story we inherited from a time when nobody had asked the question carefully. The fish came up to the edge of the pond because something at the surface caught its attention. Whether it was just a shape or whether it was specifically, depends on the fish and on how often you had been there before. The categories most people use to think about fish weren't built to handle the second answer. But the fish, for the most part, are paying more attention than we assumed. They have been the whole time.